Some dare call it conspiracy.
Hello Initiates, we've got a Some Dare Call It Conspiracy extra portion for you here. This is a blog that I did quite a while ago, and it's a bit of an interesting one because at the time I was still dangling my feet in the conspiracy world quite heavily. But at the time, the EU was considered to be the worst thing on the planet. It was the stepping stone to the New World Order. It was tyrannical. They were imposing all sorts of laws on us and making our lives particularly hellish. And so I discovered that that wasn't really true. And so the weird thing about this blog is it's me trying to sort of pander to the conspiracy crowd whilst actually finding stuff out about the conspiracy crowd that isn't true. It also includes mind control, manipulation programs, media manipulation, think tanks, the oil industry, stolen elections, and all that stuff that should appeal to the conspiracy crowd, but in this case didn't at all because it doesn't go along with their preconceived narrative. This is the story of Cambridge Analytica, a real conspiracy that was completely ignored by the conspiracy crowd.
Cambridge Analytica Part 3. Cambridge Analytica, Hungary and Israel. And this was first published on Monday the 17th of September 2018. Hello again. Wouldn't it be weird if the same people who engineered the Brexit vote and got Trump elected also happened to be behind the election of far-right leaders across Europe like Hungary's Viktor Orban? Wouldn't it also be strange if Israel was creating far-right militias in Europe and helping get far-right parties elected into power? Wouldn't it also be strange if this was facilitated by an American media company with ties to the elites and the government? Well, we live in strange times. The recent resurgence of the far-right across Europe and the proliferation of far-right propaganda via the alternative media is promoted as an organic happening, an uprising of the disgruntled and the disenfranchised, a reaction to an unfair society, loss of identity, and imposing of ridiculous political correctness. We have seen in the previous two blog posts that the media darlings of the right wing are financed by a small group of very wealthy people with connections to the British and American establishment who had a vested interest in getting the UK out of the EU and getting Trump into power. This recent uprising was far from an organic movement. It was a long thought out and well executed behaviour change program, utilising the psychological warfare methodology of the data mining firm Cambridge Analytica. It serves a select group of far-right billionaires and millionaires and was seemingly given the green light by members of the UK and US government and functioned by spreading fear, hatred, xenophobia and, in their own words, leveraging a false enemy to fight against. Creating an enemy. When you are seeking to exploit a minority group and direct the anger of a disenfranchised mass towards them, there are several things that we see unfold. In the vast majority of these cases, it involves a disgruntled population looking to those in power to ask, quite reasonably, why does life and society seem so imbalanced? At this point, the savvy rich person will tell the group of poor people that, despite evidence to the contrary, they are not to blame for stockpiling wealth and abusing resources. Oh no, perish the thought. The rich people will tell the poor people that another group of poor people is to blame for their lack of money, opportunity, hope, future and prospects. Now, on the face of it, most sensible people would cry nonsense and realise it is the wealthy people who have stolen your money, not those with nothing. But people are complicated and contradictory beasts. It is difficult to have a go at the powerful, as often you are on a hiding to nothing. In fact, choosing this line of inquiry will ultimately make you feel even more powerless and helpless to prevent your future from spiralling out of control. It is far more psychologically comforting to blame someone that you feel superior to. The key to choosing a perfect enemy is twofold. They must be well known enough to provide a level of fear, and you have to be ignorant enough of the facts of this group to believe the propaganda. They should also appear powerful enough to be a threat to everything that you hold dear, whilst, at the same time, not having the sufficient influence to argue their corner or defend their position. Therefore, anything that can be positioned as foreign or as an exotic other will fit the bill nicely and provide all the required variables for a really successful hate target. The first group of poor people will be so incensed that the second set of poor people might get something that they don't, that they will completely forget that it is the wealthy people who are purposely withholding or keeping resources to themselves in order to keep the masses fighting amongst each other. Steve Bannon. With that in mind, half man, half soiled beanbag stolen from a poorly funded drug and alcohol rehabilitation centre, Steve Bannon has been busy recently. He has been trolling around Europe trying his darndest to set up a far-right foundation which he hopes to name with the dystopic moniker The Movement. Ironically, The Movement is also an American hip-hop and reggae band who I assume do not share Bannon's political views. Since his departure from the White House in August of 2017, the former Breitbart editor has met a series of right-wing leaders including France's Marine Le Pen, Alice Weidel of Alternative for Germany, Hungary's Viktor Orban and Nigel Farage. In March he urged a Front National rally in France to let them call you racist and wear it as a badge of honour, as he claimed that history was on the side of the far right, which shows he is quite the rabble-rouser, even if his grasp of history is comically inadequate. Bannon has also praised recent far-right politician Matteo Salvini, who became Italy's deputy prime minister this year. Mr. Salvini has announced a census of the country's Roma community and closed its ports to humanitarian ships rescuing migrants off the coast of Libya. Italy is the beating heart of modern politics, Bannon said. If it works there, it can work everywhere. During a recent visit to the UK, he described the founder of the English Defence League, Tommy Robinson, as the backbone of Britain, in comments made off-air after his appearance on Farage's LBC radio show. It is possible that he merely mispronounced gammon, but I seriously doubt it. Marine Le Pen was, at one time, the darling of Steve Bannon's Breitbart. The right-wing magazine heavily promoted her and the issues that she used to manipulate the public. At one point, Breitbart was going to set up a French office to support Le Pen, in the same way that they opened the London branch to help ex-City trader and frontrunner for the lead if there is ever another live-action version of Toad of Toad Hall, Nigel Farage. Recently, Bannon has turned his attention to Le Pen's niece, Marianne Maréchal Le Pen, as a potential rising star of the far right in Europe. At a recent press conference he held in France, he stated, "What I've learned is that you're part of a worldwide movement that's bigger than France, bigger than Italy, bigger than Hungary, bigger than all of us." He may be right, but this has been manufactured by the wealthy. It was recently exposed that the far-right AfD party in Germany was being promoted via Gatestone Media. You may remember from the first blog that Gatestone Media was the company that made the videos showing Germany and France as having fallen to Sharia law as part of Cambridge Analytica's propaganda program to get Trump elected. You may also remember that it is financed by Nina Rosenwald. Nina Rosenwald was, in 2003, a recipient of the Louis Brandeis Award given by the Zionist Organization of America for her pro-Israel advocacy. Rebecca Mercer also helps fund Gatestone Media via her family foundation. Funding for Gatestone also comes from the MEF, the Middle East Forum, a hardline conservative pro-Israel think tank. Gatestone Media also provides content for Rebel Media, which is financed by Robert Mercer, the main financier of Breitbart and the Trump campaign. John Bolton sits on the board of Gatestone Media. He was the architect of the war on terror and now is the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States of America. As reported by The Intercept magazine, election watchers expected a flood of fake news and inflammatory social media aiding Alternative for Germany, known by its German initials AfD, to come from Russia. But one of the major publishers of online content friendly to the far right is an American website financed in large part and led by Jewish philanthropist Nina Rosenwald. Rosenwald's site, the Gatestone Institute, publishes a steady flow of inflammatory content about the German election focused on stoking fears about immigrants and Muslims. In one of the most recent posts, the website warns of the construction of mosques in Germany and claims that Christianity is becoming extinct. The Gatestone posts, which are often translated into German, are regularly promoted by AfD politicians and AfD-related social media groups to justify the party's crusade against Chancellor Angela Merkel's open-door refugee policy. One viral Gatestone story claimed that Germany was confiscating homes to use for migrants. The piece, which was shared by AfD supporters, including Thomas Rudy, a senior AfD politician in the central German state of Thuringia, claimed that vacant homes in Hamburg were seized by local authorities seeking new housing solutions for the hundreds of thousands of migrants from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Local German press, however, condemned the Gatestone story as false. A single house in Hamburg went into temporary trusteeship after several apartments at the home remained vacant. Refugees did not play a role in the district's decision, fact-checking website Corrective noted. The story was typical of Gatestone's approach. The website's Germany-related coverage includes story after story about migrants raping German women, claims that migrants are bringing highly infectious diseases to Germany, and Muslims are transforming entire German neighborhoods into no-go zones where local police have lost control. Many of the claims about Muslims in Europe have been debunked as false or sensationalized heavily. Gatestone articles in the past have notably elevated Bjorn Hock, an AfD leader who represents the party's far-right faction. She, Rosenwald, is the daughter of the late William Rosenwald, a famous Jewish philanthropist who used his share of the Sears, Roebuck and Company department store fortune to settle Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi terror in Europe. Nina, however, has emerged as one of the most generous donors to campaigns against Muslim refugees in the US and Europe. As The Intercept previously reported, Rosenwald's foundation not only finances Gatestone, but also funds leading Islamophobic pundits including Robert Spencer, Frank Gaffney, and David Horowitz. Horowitz is the conservative activist who mentored Stephen Miller, a White House aide who was closely involved in President Donald Trump's executive order temporarily banning individuals from several Muslim-majority countries. As journalist Max Blumenthal reported in 2012, Rosenwald is an active supporter of hardline pro-Israel groups and a former board member of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. The Gatestone website is currently chaired by former US Ambassador to the United Nations John Bolton, the former Bush administration official who was reportedly vetted by the Trump administration for a national security-related role but was ultimately passed over. The Gatestone Institute lists Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz, Fox News pundit Pat Cadell, and Breitbart News editor Raheem Kassam as distinguished senior fellows who contribute to the site. Rebecca Mercer, a major Trump donor and financial backer of Breitbart News, was listed as a member of the Gatestone Institute Board of Governors earlier this year, but her name was later removed from the website. Mercer is the daughter of billionaire hedge fund executive Robert Mercer, whose foundation has supported Gatestone over the years. By sheer coincidence, Gatestone Media heavily promoted Marianne and Marine Le Pen, Geert Wilders, and Matteo Salvini too. So a truckload of familiar Mercer and Horowitz finance faces are abound. The purpose of the movement, the far-right organisation and not the reggae band, is to rival the Open Society Foundation, set up by the far-right's favourite target, George Soros. Read on to see why this is significant. Ultimately, with the goal of promoting far-right ideology and political action. If you're interested, the goal of the movement reggae band is, according to band member and lead vocalist Josh Swain, I've always thought of it as what I like to call alternative reggae. We don't really feel like roots reggae, we're not Rasta, it comes out a little bit more hip-hop, a little bit more rock. Hungary. In May of 2018, Bannon attended and spoke at a conference on the banks of Budapest's River Danube. The main reason for this was to heap praise on the far-right Prime Minister or autocratic dictator of Hungary, Viktor Orban. Bannon described Orban as Trump before Trump. Orban positions himself as a man of the people, just like Trump, Farage, Robinson, Wilders, and other extremely wealthy far-right figureheads, and uses fear and disenfranchisement of the population to provide scapegoats for problems. Does any of that sound familiar? Peter Krejko, the director of Political Capital, a policy research institute based in Budapest, is suspicious of the seeming organic nature of Orban's rise to power. Bannon comes to Europe to sell himself as the revolutionary, but in Hungary he's welcomed not just by the far right, but the government too. It's not a movement, it's a top-down deal to create support for the Hungarian government, there isn't any kind of popular support. Here, the alt-right is being led from above. Mr. Orban has been successful in creating a movement around him. This is a continuation of that. It's about making his movement sexier, catchier, and more up-to-date. Andrus Toth-Sisfa, a fellow of the European Stability Initiative, said Mr. Orban's friendships should put question marks around his place among mainstream European conservatives. In 2017, Orban's government financially supported the organisation of the far-right World Congress of Families in Budapest, he said. In the past, Mr. Toth says, the Hungary leader relied on the element of plausible deniability, aware of the risk of upsetting partners in the European People's Party, or the EPP, to which the Fidesz party belongs in the European Parliament. He's done this even as figures such as Dutch anti-Muslim politician Geert Wilders and former leader of the UK's far-right British National Party, Nick Griffin, both shunned as extremists in their home countries, were welcomed. Orban has expertly leveraged a false enemy for his population to rage against, using tactics remarkably similar to those of ban and finance Cambridge Analytica. There is a very good reason that these tactics seem so familiar. In the same way that Cambridge Analytica influenced the Brexit vote and the Trump campaign, Black Cube, an offshoot of Cambridge Analytica with connections to Mossad, manipulated the population with propaganda that suited Viktor Orban's agenda. How is this all connected? So, for about a year I was saying that, despite being a thoroughly untrustworthy character, the recent suggestions that George Soros was encouraging the refugee crisis as part of a leftist plot to take over Europe was nothing more than agitprop. Fake stories seeded into the media with little or no evidence to demonise the left and give the right, which are actually financed by the elites and intelligence agencies, a bogeyman to fight against and make themselves feel righteous. Well, I was right. It was Cambridge Analytica, and they bloody well got caught doing it. The idea that George Soros had engineered the refugee crisis to promote diversity and destroy national identities was mostly pushed by the far-right government of Viktor Orban in Hungary. This theory appears to understate the impact of the wars that caused these refugees in the first place and have scant evidence to support them. I always thought Orban was a rum one, since it was revealed that his government paid for buses to take refugees to France and Germany, and then used a social media campaign to suggest incorrectly that this was the work of Soros and the Open Society Foundation. Orban's current policy involves stopping trains that had no scheduled stops in Hungary and removing and arresting refugees. He then puts them on buses and sends them to Germany and France, whilst parading them on state-sponsored TV as evidence of this huge influx. Whilst basic, this propaganda is extremely successful. Orban has made the refugee crisis much worse, and then blamed his enemies for his actions. Well, it turns out that he was aided into power by a data mining firm similar to Cambridge Analytica, which has worked with Cambridge Analytica on election management in Africa and has Cambridge Analytica board members on its board. Their chief tactic was to spread fear and fake news via social media and honey traps. Sound familiar? Black Cube. Black Cube is a data mining and election management firm just like Cambridge Analytica, and Politico magazine revealed it was hired by the Orban government to spread lies about the Soros-connected NGOs to suggest that he, with Germany, were planning a leftist or communist takeover of Hungary and the rest of the EU. Aside from spreading straight-up lies claiming this conspiracy with no evidence, they also approached members of NGOs connected to the OFS and recorded them before editing the comments to make them seem sinister. There are huge human rights abuses in Hungary. Strangely, the government is shy about investigating this or altering these conditions, and so it is reliant on non-governmental organisations to keep them in check. The Orban government, with the help of Black Cube, made it appear that these companies had suggested that Germany should impose law on Hungary. What they actually did was propose checks and balances from other EU countries where human rights abuses are taking place. Bizarrely, the Hungarian government wasn't keen on this. Recently, these abuses led to Hungary narrowly avoiding being kicked out of the EU. They were rescued by the UK Conservative government. Black Cube was founded by Vincent Chengui with the help of high-level ex-Mossad operatives. Vincent Chengui is one of the most prominent shareholders with Cambridge Analytica. Just like Cambridge Analytica, it is a PSYOPs firm with ex-intelligence agencies making up the majority of its board. Also, just like Cambridge Analytica, it is under export control. Cambridge Analytica has a List X clearance, which means it can hold UK intelligence files secret and higher, and is under export control to the UK government. This means its techniques are considered a weapon and can't be used without their explicit say-so. This means elements of the UK government and US government and intelligence agencies wanted Brexit and wanted Trump elected. Similarly, and terrifyingly, Black Cube, an offshoot of Cambridge Analytica, is under export control to the Israeli Defense Ministry. It is a weapon of the Israeli government and the Israeli intelligence agencies, and they installed a far-right government in Hungary using George Soros as a leverage fake enemy to fight against. Essentially, elements of Mossad got Orban elected. Israel also installed a powerful far-right militia in the Ukraine with the help of the UK, USA and Canada, and Israeli intelligence operatives were also seen during Cambridge Analytica's recent Nigeria campaign. So, just to reiterate, Cambridge Analytica is a weapon of the British government. It has to be approved for use and was used to help swing the EU referendum and to get Trump elected President of the United States of America. Black Cube is an offshoot of Cambridge Analytica and has to be approved before use by the Israeli Defense Ministry. So the exit from the EU by Britain, the election of Trump, the installation of far-right elements in the Ukraine and the installation of a far-right government in Hungary were also approved by these governments. These were not populist uprisings, they were engineered by the intelligence agencies of the UK, USA and Israel. Steve Bannon, Geert Wilders, Nigel Farage, Sweden's SD, right-wing militias in the Ukraine, Germany's AfD, and France's FN and Le Pen family seem to be connected in their efforts to spread far-right sentiment across Europe. I get the impression this is all part of the same programme. It is interesting that we've seen far-right parties emerge in Greece, the Golden Dawn, and across Europe in the past few years, and it will be fascinating to see who is funding these groups. Please do not get me wrong, I'm no fan of George Soros. As far as I can see, he's a CIA asset, and he was used to break up Yugoslavia. But in regards to the recent refugee crisis, he is being used as a bogeyman to legitimise the fight of the far right. If he is involved, it is to play the part of the heel, to play the bad guy and provide a sense of righteousness to his opposition. Hungary. The state of affairs in Hungary was recently summed up by Vox magazine. Elections there are free in the sense that the vote counts aren't nakedly rigged, but they are unfair. The government controls the airwaves and media companies to such a degree that the opposition can't get a fair hearing. Orban's party, Fidesz, stands up bogus opposition parties during parliamentary elections as a means of dividing the anti-Fidesz votes. In April 2018, Fidesz won the national elections, cementing Orban's hold on power. International monitors concluded that the opposition never had a fair chance. Hungary's civil society looks free and vibrant on paper, but a patchwork of nonsensical regulations makes it nearly impossible for pro-democracy organisations to do their work. The economy seems to be growing, but a significant number of corporations are controlled by Orban's cronies. An unending drumbeat of propaganda from both official state outlets and private media empires of Orban allies demonises refugees and Muslims, warning of an existential threat to Hungarian society and culture, and touting the Orban regime as the only thing protecting the country from an Islamic takeover. This trumped-up crisis serves as a legitimation tool for Fidesz's authoritarianism, a pretext for the government to pass laws undermining its opponents. Call it soft fascism, a political system that aims to stamp out dissent and seize control of every major aspect of a country's political and social life without needing to resort to hard measures like banning elections and building up a police state. The Vox article also shows how the state in Hungary took control of the media and the dissemination of information by Orban's Fidesz party. Private media was a principal target of the Fidesz power grab. After the 2010 victory, the Fidesz government used the power of the state to pressure private media corporations to sell to the state or to oligarchs aligned with Fidesz. Tactics included withholding government advertising dollars, selectively blocking mergers that would allow outlets to expand, and imposing punitive taxes on ad revenue. By 2017, 90% of all media in Hungary was owned by either the state or a Fidesz ally, according to account by Budapest-based scholar Marius Dragomir. This media empire includes every single regional newspaper in the country. The electoral process itself was also manipulated to favour the far right. Fidesz also worked to reshape the electorate itself. A 2010 law granted citizenship rights to ethnic Hungarians in nearby countries like Romania, including the ability to vote and to access Hungarian social benefit payments. Though many of these ethnic Hungarians have never set foot in Hungary, more than 1 million non-domestic Hungarians have signed up for this citizenship programme. They currently make up about 10% of the electorate and are largely on board with Orbán's far-right nationalist agenda, voting for Fidesz at an astonishing 95% rate. Some of these actions have been even shadier. In the past 2 elections, for example, Fidesz helped create several fake parties, including one party that was being run by someone who turned out to be homeless. That got on the ballot using signatures of Fidesz supporters and dead people. These parties split the anti-Fidesz vote in competitive districts, making it much easier for the Fidesz candidate to win a plurality. None of these tactics on their own formally ended Hungarian democracy, but combined, they effectively rigged the political system to give Fidesz a nigh insurmountable edge. Orbán's party also have control over the country's business interests. You'd think that the Buda office of a successful Hungarian corporation would radiate a sense of power, looking out over the city, confident in its wealth, but the one I visited felt less like Wall Street and more like the site of a wake. One of the company's founders, who asked to remain anonymous out of fear of retaliation, explained why. The Orbán regime had just shaken them down, using mafia-like tactics to seize control of their corporation. The founder explained that he had recently received a phone call from a government official, one whose office had nothing to do with the business in question, who had heard the man's corporation was for sale. This was news to the businessman. "We weren't planning to sell," he told me. But the government wanted his company as a way to gain access to a new stream of EU funding the state coveted. Anyone familiar with the way business in Hungary worked, the business executive said, would understand that the phone call was an implicit threat. He could either sell his company and abandon something that he'd spent years building, or watch helplessly as the government choked it to death with taxes and regulations. Anyone who has a conflict with any of Orbán's boys, they will get the tax agency within weeks, for many weeks, he said. We weren't forced to sell, we just weren't allowed to win. So he sold his company to a major state-run enterprise. He has since moved his family out of Hungary, elsewhere in Europe, hopefully putting them outside of Fidesz's reach. This place, meaning Hungary, is closing down, he said. My kids will be doing great in a real, free European country. This kind of corruption is a defining feature of Hungary's soft fascism. Unsatisfied with merely making elections unfair, Orbán and Fidesz have turned the state's power over commerce into an effective tool of social control. The state's economic policies are cleverly designed both to enrich Orbán's allies and to neutralize potential threats to their hold on power. Fidesz watches Hungary's business community closely because they're the people who could finance an anti-government uprising, and it punishes those it sees as potentially serious threats. Few wealthy Hungarians are willing to risk their fortunes by challenging Orbán, and without access to an independent source of funding, it's difficult for anyone to create a political force strong enough to challenge Fidesz's hegemony. The corruption of the autocratic regime roots out dissent and strengthens itself via economic favours. One of the best ways to understand how this works is to look at the way that the government gives out contracts. Most liberal democracies have open and transparent bidding and grant processes, but in Hungary, things work a little bit differently. A statistical analysis by Istvan Janos Toth and Miklos Haju, two scholars at the Corruption Research Centre in Budapest, examined more than 126,000 government contracts issued by the government from 2010 to 2016. Specifically, they looked to see whether contracts issued to companies owned by four hyper-wealthy men in particular, all current or former Orban allies, differed from those issued to Hungarian firms without such connections. What they found was striking. Contracts awarded to the four men were disproportionately likely to be awarded without a bidding process, and the companies were particularly likely to receive EU funds over which the government exercises tight control. Laurent Mezaros, one of the four men the study looked at, and a childhood friend of Orban's, trained professionally as a gas technician. In 2009, he was not a particularly wealthy man, but under the Orban government, he managed to build up a wide-ranging business empire on the basis of these government contracts. By 2017, he was the 8th richest man in Hungary, with a fortune of roughly $392 million. The fact that I've made it to this point can surely be attributed to the roles played by God, luck, and Viktor Orban, Mezaros said in a 2014 interview with a pro-Fidesz newspaper. Soros paid for Orban's education. In a hugely ironic turn of events, it was George Soros that initially championed a young Viktor Orban and even paid for the future autocrat's education. In 1991, Orban gladly accepted over £1 million donation from George Soros to help him with environmental concerns. It is also true that despite what Orban's propaganda states, Soros only spent $3.6 million in Hungary in 2016, and this is a fraction of what the Orban government spent demonising him with their propaganda campaign. It is almost certain that Black Cube/Cambridge Analytica cost even more. The money Soros spent was used to battle government corruption, human rights abuses, and to promote equality for different races, religions, and sexual orientation. Israel. Some of you may recall that recently Mossad and the Israeli government, along with MI6 and the UK government, were accused of installing a far-right, neo-Nazi militia in the Ukraine, which seems to be part of a wider pattern of spreading right-wing and nationalist ideology. One of these groups is the Azov Battalion. Azov Battalion online propaganda shows Israeli-licensed Tavor rifles in the fascist group's hands, while Israeli human rights activists have protested arms sales to the Ukraine on the basis that the weapons might end up with anti-Semitic militias. In a letter about licenses for Ukraine obtained by the Electronic Intifada, the Israeli Defense Ministry's arms export agency says that they are careful to grant licenses to arms exporters in full coordination with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other government entities. The Azov Battalion proudly state that they use Israeli Tavor rifles. The rifles are produced under license from Israeli weapon industries and as such would have to have been authorized by the Israeli government. IWI markets the Tavor as the primary weapon of Israeli special forces. The UK and the USA and Canada have also been providing weaponry and training to these same neo-Nazis. US weapons including rocket-propelled grenades and training have been provided to Azov. Under pressure from the Pentagon, a clause in the annually renewed defense bill banning US aid to the Ukraine from going to the Azov Battalion was repeatedly stripped out. This went on for 3 straight years, before Democratic lawmaker Ro Khanna and others pushed it through earlier this year. In regards to Canada, recent postings on Azov websites document a June meeting with the Canadian military attaché, Colonel Brian Irwin. According to Azov, the Canadians concluded the briefing by expressing their hopes for further fruitful cooperation. Today, Azov is run by Arsen Avakov, Ukraine's interior minister. According to the BBC, he pays its fighters and has appointed one of its military commanders, Vadim Troyan, as his deputy, with control over the police. Azov have been accused by the UN of committing war crimes. In a screaming piece of irony, when interviewed, Azov fighters proudly state that they fight against Russia because Vladimir Putin is a Jew. The logic train clearly does not stop at this station. Boris Johnson. In the summer of 2018, foie gras stuffed scarecrow Boris Johnson met with Steve Bannon several times. This was off the back of Cambridge Analytica, financed by Bannon, and their success in the EU referendum, and Bannon's recent yearning to start his far-right movement. Following this, Johnson released his now infamous comment comparing burqas to pillowboxers, and later he compared Theresa May to a suicide bomber. The pandering to his new benefactor could not have been more obvious if he had used Steve Bannon's underwear to floss his teeth. This was plainly an attempt to consolidate with Bannon and to appeal to his base with xenophobic, Islamophobic rhetoric. Let us not forget that leaving the EU would withdraw the UK from certain tax avoidance laws that would otherwise scupper the offshore bank accounts of people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, David Cameron and Boris Johnson, who were exposed as having semi-legal offshore bank accounts in the Panama Papers. This is, I am sure, a complete coincidence. This was not the first time that the Foreign Secretary and brain-damaged Labrador had met with Cambridge Analytica. In December 2016, Johnson met with Alexander Nix of Cambridge Analytica on the advice of the Foreign Office. He failed to disclose this meeting in the normal ways, forgetting to record it in any parliamentary logs, and certainly not making this public knowledge. The UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office asked the SCL Group to help shape their foreign policy data strategy. This was revealed by Bella Caledonia magazine, who reported on the Diplomacy in the Information Age conference in February 2017. What was discussed there is as follows. Networks, both diplomatic and social, understanding, developing and disrupting them. How are networks evolving beyond traditionally geographically centered relationships to align with interests and ideology? Knowledge, combing open source, proprietary and privileged information to deliver powerful insights and deep understanding. Big data, finding the signal in the noise. Influence, how people get information and form opinions is changing. New phenomena are emerging. Post-truth, echo chambers, and filter bubbles. What are the effective influence strategies that embrace these changes? Forecasting. How can data and data-driven decision-making help us anticipate issues and opportunities early and, where possible, take effective action to mitigate or exploit these? That's comforting stuff, isn't it? And this was all after the court expose of Cambridge Analytica's nefarious tactics. This obviously wasn't a concern to the Conservative government. Another thing that the Conservatives have no problem with is Viktor Orban's Hungary. Hungary has for a long time been accused of human rights abuses and is seen by most as an emerging dictatorship. Recently, the EU voted to impose Article 7 on Hungary, essentially kicking them out and removing any aid or funding. The Independent newspaper summarises the reasons. Some might remember the law that criminalised helping asylum seekers or facilitating illegal immigration, which was introduced in July as a response to the refugee crisis. Considering that Orban had referred to migrants as poison and Muslim invaders, by that point, few were surprised by the so-called Stop Soros law. Orban has a particular dislike for George Soros, and Hungary's government newspaper, Magyar, has published claims that Soros activists wanted to provoke civil unrest. Razor wire border fences had already been erected around the country in 2015 in response to fleeing refugees from Syria. Over the last few months, organisations seen to ideologically support immigration, particularly charities, have been vandalised and demonised by the Hungarian press. Orban has repeatedly professed his disdain for liberal democracy. After his most recent landslide victory, he said that he was concerned with supporting the traditional family model of one man and one woman. He has complained about Europe being de-Christianized or Islamicized. He wants Europe to be for Europeans. For some, he is seen as bringing back power to the people, returning sovereignty to Hungary, making Hungary great again, if you will, by restoring Hungarian control of the banking sector, putting pressure on foreign NGOs, and turning the free press into a perpetually optimistic government propaganda vehicle. This final charge is particularly concerning to the EU, as well as the suspicions about election spending, allegations of distributing EU funds to family and friends, and interference in the judicial system. When one realises that Black Cube, the Israeli-run Cambridge Analytica offshoot, participated in this election meddling, and Cambridge Analytica has a board flooded with current and ex-Tory peers, and that the Conservatives were in power and would have to allow Cambridge Analytica to utilise its weaponry, perhaps this is not so surprising. It's shameful and it's horrifying, But it's not surprising. This is about the wealthy spreading far-right propaganda for their own ends, and the scale of the operation is global. In July 2018, the Conservatives also announced an alliance with Sweden's far-right SD party, who have a history of promoting white supremacy. Steve Bannon has also been highly positive about Sweden's SD, although officially they rebuffed his attempts to connect. Sweden's far right, for some reason, wants to move its embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, in line with Israeli Mercer Trump Bannon policies. The Swedish SD party had previously sat in the EFFD group with UKIP and Germany's AFD. Sweden's SD, UKIP and the AFD were also part of the failed ADDE, a joint far-right multi-party anti-EU political party. UKIP, who complains of the waste of money of the EU, put £1.5 million of taxpayers' money into forming this party. UKIP have never been shy about spending taxpayers' money, which some might call hypocritical. Farage and Infowars and Breitbart spread false stories about Sweden in order to stoke right-wing sentiment in other countries. What does this mean? This means that the promotion of the far right that was tied into Cambridge Analytica's successful Brexit and Trump campaigns is part of a larger ideological drive to promote fascism across Europe. This is approved by the government and intelligence agencies of the UK, Israel, and the US. This is financed by extremely wealthy establishment figures and utilises psychological warfare weapons owned by governments. The rise of the far right in France, Sweden, Greece, and Hungary is part of this operation. 1. There is a company called Cambridge Analytica that bypasses democracy and covertly influences elections all over the globe with a combination of social media, fake news, and military psychological warfare tactics, specifically creating artificial enemies to rally against. 2. They have connections to the MOD, British Military Intelligence, MI5, MI6, the US State Department, and the British establishment. The tactics used by SCL are considered a weapon and are under export control by the British government. Black Cube is a weapon of the Israeli government and is under export control from the Israeli Defense Ministry. 3. They use tactics alarmingly similar to established GCHQ programs like JTRIG and US military and intelligence operations designed to influence behavior via social media and to affect mood. 4. They are owned and or financed by mysterious far-right billionaires and millionaires that have a white supremacist ideology. They also finance several arms of alternative media and appear to be trying to normalize far-right propaganda by spreading it through the alternative media. Five. Cambridge Analytica was also responsible for the election of Hungary's Viktor Orbán, who is the main proponent of the idea that George Soros is to blame for the refugee crisis. This turned out to be Cambridge Analytica and Black Cube psychological warfare propaganda. 6. Cambridge Analytica financier Steve Bannon is attempting to spread far-right popularism across Europe via various different political parties. 7. Cambridge Analytica is also connected to various data mining and monitoring companies that are part of the ever-expanding Total Information Control Grid. This is by no means a complete picture yet. I'm just pulling on strings and seeing where the facts take me. But one thing we can definitely see is that there is a concerted effort to promote aggressive nationalism and far-right propaganda across Europe. It is being sold as an organic uprising of the masses, but in actual fact appears to have been planned, funded, and implemented by members of the establishment for their own reasons. These reasons are not entirely clear to me at present, but, and you can call me an old cynic if you like, I doubt they are altruistic. I don't understand why people keep putting their trust in a set of proven liars who time and time again put their own interests against the well-being of the general population.
Some dare call it conspiracy.
Thank you for listening to Some Dare Call It Conspiracy. Follow us on Twitter @SomeDarePodcast for all the latest from us. And if you want to support us, please consider joining us on patreon.com/SomeDareCallItConspiracy. You'll be able to get early access to episodes, including each full deep dive series on day one, and exclusive Patreon-only episodes. When you subscribe to our Initiate tier for a $5 or our Handler tier for a $10, you'll get a welcome pack of 4 of Neil's books, 8 of my albums and EPs, and a PDF of Headache Comics 4, courtesy of Nicholas C. Gray. And to our first Patreons, thank you so much for your support from the both of us at Some Dare Call It Conspiracy.